We all have people in our lives that we want to talk to, that we want to build relationships with, and it's about sharing our story. We understand who Jesus is and the hope that we have in Him, and we want to go out there. I love talking with people. I love really talking with people I agree with. But as we talk about our story more, and as we're out sharing our story more, because we have this great hope that we believe in, and we want other people to experience it, right? We love them so much. It's like we want them to have this joy we have in Jesus. But what happens when we go out in the real world, we start talking with people in our real relationships, and we find out there can be some conflict there. Sometimes people can be difficult. Sometimes we get into situations where people don't always agree with us. And so today I just want to talk to you just a little bit about how do we interact with people like that. Maybe share some things about my own life, some ways in which I do it, but just looking at, I think, some simple things that help us think about how we interact with people we don't always agree with. Because if you're in the real world, you're going to find people you don't agree with, and if we're not going out there and sharing our story, we're probably not going to bounce into people like that. But we need to be out there doing that, and as we talk with people. So I just want a couple of words for us to think about. In the book of Romans, it says, Romans chapter 12, it says that we should do our best to live at peace with everybody. My job is not always to have people agree with me, but my job is to live peaceably with people. My job is to do my best job that I can do to make sure that I'm not disrupting the peace. But as I go out and tell people about Jesus, and find times where discussions come up which could even lend to arguments. So there's a couple words I want us to think about when it comes to those things. One, the first word is humility. Us having an idea and understanding that I don't have all the answers. When I look at people and start thinking about them the way that I'd want to be treated, the way I want to be talked to, it changes everything the way I approach them. It changes everything about me in my discussion with people. If I come at it humbly saying, I don't have all the answers, all I know is what God has done in my life and how God has changed in my life, I think it really seems to set people at ease. Where we get in trouble is when we want to start worrying about winning arguments, when we start wanting to prove our point like God depends on us to prove a point. And that's not the case. God is the one who changes hearts. But we want to share with people what it is that we believe, and we believe in that stuff honestly and really want to give our lives for it. But we need to come at it with humility. So it's looking at someone and looking at them, even in their interest, even is more important than our own. How do I want to be treated when people talk to me? I don't want to be talked down on. I don't want people to be in an argument with me where they're just trying to win an argument and bring in an attitude of arrogance. So I'd encourage you to think about humility. You don't have all the answers. Nobody does. Second one is grace. I just encourage us to remember the word grace. Grace is us getting something that we don't deserve. God giving us unmerited favor, the Bible says. Grace, when we look at what grace is, it's us seeing that, I'm going to give this person something even if they don't deserve it. Looking at people and saying, I once was there too. I don't know about all of us, but I remember whenever I was far from God. I remember being a sinner where I was distant from God and facing wrath. But God stepped into my life and changed my heart, not because of anything I've done. So if we look at people when we're in discussions with them, things we don't always agree with, if we approach them with grace and say, I'm going to look at this person and look at them the way that God looked at me. How can I show them love even if they don't maybe deserve it, or maybe they're not even acting that way? Because what happens when we start acting out humility and acting out grace, it just trickles through in people's lives, and people start seeing us more for our actions than just for what our words. Where we get into trouble is when people just see our words we're sharing. We could be sharing great words of truth and hope, but if our actions and our lifestyle don't back that up, people will never hear those things. They'll only remember how I interacted with them. They'll only remember what kind of attitude I have and all those things. I remember one time being at Universal Studios, and this is like an illustration to think about. I'm riding one of those water rides down there that they had, and it was one of those rides where you go and you're trying not to get wet because you don't want to be miserable all day, but you just get drenched and get soaked. And when you get out, your clothes are dripping, and then your shoes are just oozing water with every step. It's like squish, squish, and everywhere you go. See, what happens is people look at you, though, and they're like, oh, that person was on the water ride. They know because they see the water oozing out of your shoes. They see the tracks that you're making and all those things. I think that's the way it should be with us in our relationship with God. As I follow Jesus, spending time with Him where my life is beginning to change, that people, when they see me, they're like, that guy, there's something different about him. And when it comes into these conversations that we're having with people, I should be oozing out Jesus, not just in my words, but in my actions, treating them the way that He did. There's always people that didn't agree with Jesus, but He always handled it with grace and humility. He always was approaching them honestly, from His heart, with love and compassion for them. And if we look at people with those ways, people might not always agree with us, but they'll take note that there's something different. Acts chapter 4 is a story where we see about Peter and James, as we see them having the ability to heal to heal somebody. And what that did is that caused conflict. You can read about it in Acts chapter 4. It brought conflict up in people's lives with them as they interacted with them. And they didn't agree with Peter and James. They didn't agree with what they were talking about. And it says in Acts chapter 4, it says they were viewed as ordinary, unschooled, untrained men. It said, but the people took note that they had been with Jesus. If we passionately run after Jesus, that's the best thing that we can do for our friends, is us individually running after Jesus. And as we interact with him, he'll change us from the inside out, where people might not agree with our words, but they'll see that we're different, and they'll know that something has changed in our lives. And that's the best way for them to be able to see who Jesus is. God is the one in charge of changing their heart. We can't convince them that they're wrong or that we're right. But God can change hearts. And that's really what our job is to do, to share with them and to love them and be a representation of who Jesus is to them. So that when people, in our discussions, they say, you know what, I might not agree with you, but at least I know that you respected me and that you loved me and that you cared for me. And I think that's really what our job is to be. So as I would encourage you in your conversations that you have, be having conversations. We need to be sharing the love of God to the world, right? If we really believe it is the hope of the world, we need to be sharing it. But as you do, you'll come into difficult conversations. But just remember how Jesus approaches you in your life. Remember the humility that we should be having and the grace that we should show towards people. And then in our own lives, running after Jesus so he just oozes out in all of our relationships. And people might not agree with us, but they'll know that God has changed your life.